Hey. All right, let me get my microphone on. Hey everyone, how's it going? Let me just double check that my live stream is working, and I will, and we'll start. All right. Does it look like it's working? Someone in the comments, like, tell me it's working if it's working. It still says waiting for me, huh? Okay. Give me 1 second. All right, I think we're good. I'm going to go assuming that we're good. All right, so today I'm going to be making my friend Deb Perlman's baked ziti recipe. This is her classic, what she calls her old school baked ziti. I'm not exactly sure what she means by old school, but we'll find out here. So baked ziti, the reason we're making this is because Deb and I are going to be recording the second season of our podcast. In fact, we've already started recording the second season of our podcast. It's called The Recipe with Kenji and Deb, although I lobbied to have it be the recipe with Deb and Kenji. Anyhow, we're recording the second season. We've recorded a Caesar salad episode. We've recorded a BLT episode, and now we're recording a baked ziti episode. So, in our podcast, the way it works is that Deb and I, well, we've both been recipe developers for about 20 years, 15 years or so. I think 15 years each. Anyhow, combined total of more than 30 years in the business. And both of us have the sort of same goal of, we want to find recipes that work. We want to sort of empower home cooks in the kitchen. We want to make sure that people come away from our recipes feeling like they can get into the kitchen and accomplish it, However, we end up at very different places. People who follow Smitten Kitchen and Serious Eats or Smitten Kitchen and the Food Lab or my stuff know that we have pretty different styles. So we thought it would be fun and interesting to sort of compare notes on our recipes. So given that we both have a recipe, for example, for baked ziti, but our recipes are very different from each other, we thought it would be fun to sort of talk about that development process and how we arrived at such different recipes. As part of that, we cook each other's recipes. So I'm starting with a pound of ziti. It's going in some boiling water. I am going to quickly run over to double check that everything is working right. So give me like a bunch of thumbs up on the comments if everything is working on the stream, like if the audio is good, if everything seems okay, because I want this to be a good experience for everyone around. All right, so I got the a pound of ziti. Actually, I think I did penne. That's going in here. So this technically it's an impasta in here. And then we're gonna heat up. We're gonna make the sauce basically in the other pan, and then we're gonna bake it all together. It's all pretty easy. All right, let me check my stream. That's a lot of thumbs up. All right, we're good. All right, so we start here. I've got a pound of Italian sausage. So this Italian sausage, I pulled it out of my freezer this morning. It comes from Porter Road. They sent this to me because I was doing a Chicago pizza live video a couple weeks back. So I got some sausage from Porter Road. Excellent sausage, but I had this in my freezer. It was frozen this morning, and so I needed it, a few hours later. And so what I did was I took it out and I put it on this aluminum tray. It's a very effective way of defrosting foods, especially if your food is like pretty flat, because aluminum is such a good heat conductor. So it essentially like acts like a wick for heat, like it pulls away. Well, in this case, it pumps heat from the outside air into the frozen food. So it thaws a lot faster. It'll compared to like if you put a piece of frozen food on like a cutting board versus an aluminum sheet, it'll defrost about 70% faster. Don't quote me on that number, but I've written an article about it that'll give you the correct number. All right, so I got some olive oil in here. She says a good glug. I'm gonna put like a very generous glug. This olive oil is from my friend Damien Primus, he's a musician actually, but he went into the olive oil import business. His family is Greek, and he sources these really excellent Greek olive oils and imports them. So full disclosure, he's a friend of mine. However, he does import really good olive oils. So it's what I kind of use for my nice stuff, All right, so here I'm going to do the Italian sausage, pound of it. Deb says you can use ground beef also. I feel like ground beef with a can of tomatoes and like some chopped up, some diced onions. Like that's a, that's a recipe that my mom kind of made growing up. We grew up in Morningside Heights, 125th and Riverside, and it was right next to what used to be a sort of meat packing district, so a bunch of butcher shops around that area, and I've told this story before, so if you listen to my stuff, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before. But my mom used to buy meat from a guy when you stop at the traffic light there at 125th and Riverside or 125th and Broadway. There's one guy who would come and wash your windows, and then another guy who would come with a cooler full of frozen meat, frozen beef. That I assume they were like stealing it out of the backs of the trucks at the meatpacking facility nearby. But anyhow, you could buy frozen steaks and frozen ground beef and stuff while you were stopped at a red light in Morningside Heights there. And so my mom would often we had a lot of ground beef. And so anyhow, yeah, if my mom was making this recipe, we would have done it with we would have done the ground beef version, not the Italian sausage version. And that's kind of I don't know, would have been a familiar taste memory for me. All right, she actually says let's see. She says to put in, I'm not really following the instructions, add the meat and cook with onion, garlic, oregano, pepper flakes, and salt. Okay, so these are all supposed to go in at the same time. All right, so my onion, I'm going to dice it. If you watch my onion dicing video, you'll know that the most efficient way to dice an onion is if you imagine, you call the radius of the onion 1, and imagine that your knife is pointed to a place about 0.5, so half a radius below the surface of the cutting board. So your knife is going to angle towards there, and that will give you the most even onion dice with the fewest number of strokes. So, yeah, if you're not into stroking your onion, cut it like that, Yeah, there's a video. Maybe I'll link to it, or someone will link to it. But there's a video where I kind of showed how this works. I had a friend build a little mathematical model, computer model of an onion. All right. I'm gonna break up the meat. Normally, what I would do here, actually, my favorite tool for breaking up like meat that's cooking inside a cutting board. As I look for my bench scraper. My favorite tool for breaking up meat inside a cutting board is a pastry cutter. So like the same thing you would use to cut butter into flour when you're making a pie crust. So it's kind of like a little 3-bladed thing that is really good for like breaking up pieces of ground meat. Another thing that works well is if you have like a wire style potato masher. However, at this boathouse here, I do not have either of those things with me. So I'm going to use the old inefficient wooden spoon method. But it'll get the job done eventually. All right, so I got my meat, I got my onion, I got my olive oil. I got to get a couple garlic cloves in there. So if you ever wonder like whether chefs always do mise en place, whether we always have everything prepped beforehand, or whether we do like what they do in like a TV show and have everything in little glass bowls. No, I generally tend to chop things as I go. And of course I'm pretty good at judging how fast I'm going to be able to chop things and whether it's going to sort of ruin the dish that I'm taking a couple extra seconds to get the garlic in there or not. And I guess it's also like knowing things like it's better to add your onions before you add your garlic in there, just because the onions are going to take a little bit longer to soften, for example. So like, given that I'm not going to have everything in little bowls ready to go, like I'm going to chop my onions before I chop my garlic. So things like that. But anyhow, once you sort of get a feel for, I think, your own pace, mise en place becomes sort of a calculated thing for you. You kind of have to decide how worth it is for you in any given situation. Couple garlic cloves. Then I'm going to go check my pasta, which Deb says to cook until it's very al dente. So I think she means much firmer than done. The idea being that it's going to continue to soften as it cooks in the sauce. All right, where are we at the pasta? That's pretty al dente. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna drain this. Reserve some of the water. Actually, first let me get my oregano in here. So it's about a teaspoon of oregano, little chili flakes. I'm actually using Aleppo pepper there because I didn't have my normal sort of Italian style crushed red pepper flakes. But this feels like one of those situations where a classic McCormick generic crushed red pepper flake would be very appropriate to use. And definitely like the jarred bulk oregano as opposed to the the thing that the fancy chefs with there's like YouTube chefs who have like fancy beards and stuff, and they take the oregano and the Italian oregano and they have the whole plant and they shake it over there. Yeah, I would not use that kind of oregano in this particular dish. All right, let me get my drain the pasta. And what I'm going to do is take a mug here and just stick it under while I drain it so that some of that pasta water gets reserved. All right, so I got my pasta, I got my water. This is here. We're going to add our tomatoes in there. Then I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. And then what I'm going to do is, this is all going to go into the oven in a moment, and it's going to bake for about half an hour. And so while that's happening, I'm going to, I'm happy to answer your questions. They can be questions about this specific recipe. They can be questions about the podcast. If you got questions about the book, about any other projects I'm working on, whatever you want. I'm happy to sit tight here as this stuff bakes and chat with you all. So these are peeled tomatoes. Deb calls for crushed tomatoes. I typically only buy whole peeled tomatoes. I don't buy the other kinds of formats of tomatoes just because I find, I only want to have one thing on hand. Typically, you get the better quality tomatoes in the whole peeled tomatoes anyway. And whole peeled tomatoes could be, reduced down in size into whatever kind of tomato product you need. Crushed tomatoes can be just fine as well. If you do a lot of recipes that call for crushed tomatoes and you don't feel like crushing them by hand or in a food mill, you can order crushed tomatoes and those can be really good too. The one product that I tend to avoid is diced tomatoes. The reason being that diced tomatoes, in order to get the tomatoes to sort of keep that diced shape, in order for them to stay sort of firm, they add quite a bit of calcium chloride to the inside of the cans, which is, it's a perfectly safe food additive. However, the result is that the pectin in the tomato skins gets strengthened so that the tomato never breaks down even when you cook it. So that's why, when you buy a can of diced tomatoes, or if you ever go to like a cafeteria, and you see like the minestrone soup and you see those the diced chunks of tomato that don't seem to break down naturally the way a tomato would in a soup, that's because those are canned diced tomatoes that have been treated with calcium chloride. So I tend to avoid canned diced tomatoes. However, whole peeled tomatoes are fine, crushed tomatoes are fine. I like to crush tomatoes by hand, by the way. All right, let's get that in there. Make sure I follow the directions right. Yep, salt and pepper. Add the tomatoes, simmer for 5 minutes. That's it, yeah, real easy. Okay. All right, we'll let that simmer for 5 minutes. I'll do a little bit of a cleanup in the meantime. I'll read one of your questions and I'll start answering while I do a bit of a mid-cook cleanup. Let's see. We got, why does some baked ziti get sort of curdled? I always assumed it has to do with the cheese. If so, are there ideal cheeses to use to avoid this? That's a good question. Baked ziti can get curdled. This can happen both when you're first, when you bake it and it comes out of the oven. It can also happen sometimes when you bake it, it comes out of the oven just fine, and then when you let it sit overnight, it'll start to curdle, or the next day when you reheat it, it'll curdle. The same thing can happen to something like a macaroni and cheese, right? The reason that happens is because as pasta absorbs water, the reason it happens is because the sauce in here is an emulsion, right? So there's going to be a lot of liquid elements that are coming from the tomato, but there's also olive oil in there. There's fat from the meat, and so there's this mixture of both fat and water-based liquid in here. Yet it looks pretty homogeneous, right? It looks like one sort of single liquid, and that's because the fat and the liquid are emulsified in there. And so what happens though is that that emulsion is based on having the right ratio of fat to water, fat oil-based liquids to water-based liquids. And if that ratio gets thrown off, for example, by either too much of the liquid evaporating as the pasta cooks, as the whole thing bakes, or by the pasta continuing to absorb water but not fat as it sits overnight or as it cooks. Both of those things can throw off the ratio of fat-based liquid to water-based liquid, which will in turn cause your ziti to curdle. It'll cause the emulsion to break, so the fat will come out. The other thing that could happen is that depending on the types of cheese you have in here and the types of whether you have, say, like a mozzarella or ricotta or parmesan, and whether it's incorporated directly into the pasta itself or it's just on top, like that can also cause some curdling issues because as cheeses heat, the proteins will tend to clump together and coagulate, and so that can also sort of squeeze out fat and cause those little clumps, those little coagulated clumps of protein. Particularly if you're using a sort of low quality ricotta and you bake it in there, which is what I'm doing. I don't know. I will. I don't know if I care about the label, showing the label. Anyhow, it's a pretty crummy ricotta, and what happens with those sort of lower quality ricottas is that they do tend to get very grainy as they cook. And you can tell a quality ricotta, by the way, by its ingredients. So this one, it lists whey, milk, and vinegar as the first three ingredients. That's okay. You want your first ingredients in a ricotta to be some combination of whey, milk, or cream. Generally, whey or milk, as well as either vinegar or a natural starter of some kind, some acidifying agent. And then you want there to be salt in your ricotta. And those are sort of if you have only those ingredients, you have a really good quality ricotta. On the other hand, if your thing goes on and says xanthan gum, locust bean gum, guar gum, which are stabilizers, that's what's the indication that you're not getting a very good ricotta. The reason that they add those stabilizers in there is that they help the ricotta maintain their moisture without weeping. And so, generally the way ricotta is made is that you take the way that ricotta is made is that you take the whey left over from making another cheese, and then you reheat it with an acidifying agent, and then so whatever little bits of whey of protein that are left in that whey get coagulated and strained out, and that's your ricotta, right? It's called ricotta because it's ricotta means cooked again. So you're taking the cheese, the whey, and you're cooking it again. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, and so when you start draining the ricotta, when you do that, afterwards you drain it out, right? And so you're draining away the liquid portion of the whey, of the remaining whey from the other type of cheese, and you're retaining the protein clumps. So that process takes some time, and it also means that you get you drastically lower your yield. The more you strain out your ricotta, so the thicker and richer your ricotta becomes, the lower your yield. So you're basically losing all that water weight that you as a manufacturer could potentially be selling. And so what you'll find is that in these lower quality ricottas, they'll have a higher water content, so there'll actually be sort of less stuff in there, and they get that water to stay in there by adding these stabilizers that sort of bind the water in there. And what you'll find is that it looks stable in the package, but then once you start baking it, once you start cooking with it, I'm adding some of the pasta water, by the way, here just to sort of loosen this up, and we want it nice and sort of creamy and saucy. Once you start baking it, those stabilizers break down, and the ricotta will turn grainy and break, and all that sort of water will sort of weep out. So if you've ever had like a lasagna that you were using kind of low quality ricotta, sort of an American style lasagna with ricotta in it, and you weren't using the best ricotta, and you find that like your lasagna kind of turns watery as you're baking it, it's probably the water weeping out of the ricotta. Oh, what's the last thing? Oh, we were supposed to stir in some, let's see. This is fine. Oops, we were supposed to put the spinach in before we put the pasta. Sorry, Deb. Deb is a recipe purist. Like she very strictly follows recipes, even when they're her own recipes. This calls for 4 ounces of spinach. This is 5 ounces, so I'm not gonna weigh it, but I'm gonna eyeball. I just put in 80%, which is a thing that Deb would never do. She would pull out the scale for this. However, yeah, Deb is the kind of cook who once she sort of nails the ratio of something, gets the recipe just right, she wants it to be exactly the same every time. And so even if it's her own recipe, a recipe that she developed on her own, she will follow that recipe and measure everything, which I think is an admirable quality. It's not a quality that I possess, but it's a quality that Deb possesses, and one that um, I admire. I admire it, though I don't necessarily aspire to it. Yeah, I'm more the kind of cook that for me a recipe is kind of a guideline, and I'd honestly rather have the adventure of sort of trying something a little bit new every time and seeing how it turns out, rather than to sort of repeat the exact same thing. I make some exceptions. There's some things I measure out, especially if I'm sort of baking or if it involves sort of like something more delicate like charcuterie. Um, anyhow, all right. So the spinach is in there. This looks like it can handle more spinach. I'm just gonna put it all in. She calls for 5 ounces of spinach or other greens. Um, I'm using baby spinach just because it's all they had at my local supermarket here. Although I think for something like this, I would honestly prefer to use like an adult curly spinach. I'd like to use an adult spinach, a spinach that has gone through therapy and mature spinach is what I would prefer to use because I find that baby spinach tends to kind of get like kind of like a wet toilet paper quality, like a wet paper towel quality. It's like if you accidentally put a paper towel in the kitchen drain, and it's been sitting there for a little bit. That's how I feel baby spinach gets. Am I making sense to everyone? Is this all working out? All right. I'm gonna get a pan. She says do it in a casserole dish. I'm gonna do it in this big old Dutch oven thing. Let's put a little more olive oil in there just so that I want to kind of encourage. I like my when I bake pasta. I think that the point of baking pasta is that it doesn't do any favors for the texture of the cooked pasta, right? Like to me right now, actually I should taste this. It's good on salt. Need some pepper. Give me a second. When you bake pasta, it doesn't really do it any favors because it's already pretty much cooked and al dente in the pan here, and so you could eat this as is, and it would be just fine. So really, what baking does for it is it adds texture to the exterior, right? So it makes the top crispy. It adds some browning to it, and if you're lucky, it also makes sort of the edges crispy. And Deb, I think in her article about this, she specifically calls out the crispy edges of the pasta bake as her favorite bits, and I tend to concur. A circle, unfortunately, does not have crispy edges. It also has a circle is the shape that has the minimum number, the lowest, smallest perimeter for its surface area. So we are actually sort of minimizing the amount of crispy edges we can get by putting this in a circular pan as opposed to a very long, skinny, rectangular pan or a snake-shaped pan. But anyhow, it all fits in there well. Good. Let's see. What do we do now, Deb? What do we do? Add spinach cooked until wilted. Yeah, stir in the drained pasta. Right. Pour. Oh no. Oh no. I got to take half that pasta out. She wants you to layer this like nachos. All right. That's probably a good call. I'm gonna take half this out, and then we're gonna put in some cheese, and then we'll put the rest back in. Yeah, this is how this is how the professionals work. If you've ever peeked into the kitchen of your local Italian restaurant in the middle of service, it's just like a bunch of people dumping pasta out of pans because they forgot to put the cheese in the middle. All right, do a little cheese layer. Am I supposed to put the Parmesan there too? Sprinkle half of each cheese. Oh, good. All right. Let's see. She calls for. All right. She calls for 3/4 of a pound of mozzarella, but then Deb, you call for 3/4 of a pound of mozzarella, but 2/3 of a cup of Parmesan. What does that mean? You're mixing your units here. All right, so we got that going on. Pour the remaining pasta and sauce over, finish with the remaining cheese. Okay. We're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do, then we got some time to do a little more Q&A. So please, feel free to send in your questions or, your comments if you want to whatever you want to discuss. Tell me what new video game I should. I haven't played video games in months. Or don't. I'm actually happy not having played video games. Don't tell me what I need to play. All right, the rest of the cheese. Explain to me why I get distracted all the time by things. Actually, don't. My therapist already knows why, so you don't have to explain. All right, this is going in the oven. This oven is preheated at 400. Also, I apologize. I feel like I'm talking real fast today, and I just realized, sometimes the speed of my talking is a thing that I know is like an issue when I'm doing sort of like public presenting, whether I'm teaching a class or whether I'm speaking in front of an audience. I know that like the speed of my talking can be a little bit difficult for some people, so I very consciously try and slow it down like I'm doing right now. And then sometimes I just completely forget. Usually it's when I'm a little bit frenzied and working on something. I'll just completely forget about my talking speed and I'll start talking way too fast, and then I have to sort of catch myself. The same thing happens, I think, when with a lot of people when they play music, myself included. Like you can like practice something with a metronome and get it down, and then when you're like actually in front of an audience and you're sort of into it and you're not really paying attention, like you can very easily accidentally catch yourself like rapidly speeding up without even realizing it. Like going way too fast is a very common thing. It actually happens in like big crowds, right? Like people, if you're in a crowd in a stadium and you're all clapping along to a song, like everyone starts to clap faster and faster and faster, no matter what you do. All right, let's get back to our questions. Face Meat says, is there any food that you feel can't be made better at home and is best left to professionals to make? Bagels and donuts fall into this category for me. Put the oh, okay, crap. Sorry, I've been instructed to that I forgot to put the parm on top. You're right. I'm sorry. I will do that. Thanks. We'll get back to Face Meat's comment in a second. Face meat, like barbacoa, I suppose is face meat, right? All right, we're gonna get some more Parmesan on top of here. Another, I suppose, third of a cup, Deb. I don't know. How tightly packed are those cups, Deb? How finely grated is that Parmesan, Deb? I'm messing. I mean, obviously, like talking about whether you use volume versus mass in recipes is a hotly debated topic. Honestly, I think it's one that like matters way less than people seem to think. The whole idea that volume, the idea is that, well, volume is less accurate than weight because things can pack differently. So like a cup of cheese, if you tightly pack it, could be, say, 9 ounces of cheese, and if it's very sort of like fluffy and loosely packed, it could be 4 ounces of cheese. The example I usually give is like flour, right? So flour, if you scoop with a really firm grip and scoop down into a container of it, a cup of flour is going to weigh about 5.5 ounces. Whereas if you take a spoon or you sift it, a cup of flour is going to be about it can weigh as little as sort of 3.5 ounces or even 4 ounces or so. And that that's a difference of almost 50% you can find in a cup of flour depending on how you scoop it out. So that's why generally, especially when you're baking, mass is a better way to go than volume. However, with things like cheese, with things like, say, onions, I find a recipe that calls for 100 grams of diced onion. Well, that's all fine. But honestly, I think saying 1 medium onion, 1 large onion, or whatever is more effective, because realistically, people are not going to be measuring out 100 grams of onion or using like half an onion or a third of an onion or whatever. You're going to find an onion that sort of fits your recipe. And the other thing is that, like, with an ingredient like an onion, it can vary drastically depending on whether you're using a winter onion or a summer onion, the type of onion you're using, how it was stored, how old it is. All those things are going to change the way it cooks and the way it tastes. And so to think that just because you're weighing it out exactly the same way every time, it's going to taste the same way every time, I think is a little bit misguided. Anyhow, which is not to say that Deb is misguided. It's just to say that we have disagreements about things, which is, I think, great. All right, let's get back to the question. Sorry, so Face Meat was asking something real important, something that only Face Meat could ask. Is there any food that you feel can't be made better at home and is best left to professionals? Bagels and donuts fall into this category for me. I mean, honestly, I think most things, not all things, but most, there's a difference between eating out, restaurant food or say like food from a specialist and home cooked foods. And I don't think one necessarily competes or tries to compete with the other. Like honestly, like making bagels at home is a fun project. If you live in a place where you can't find good bagels, which is increasingly rare these days, if you live in a place where you can't find good bagels, then making bagels at home is great. But most of the time, you're not going to make a better bagel at home than a professional baker who has access to professional quality ingredients, who has access to and the knowledge of how to say work with lye, who has access to a real bagel oven and all the equipment that you need to make bagels. Like all that stuff is like overhead and stuff that you're not really going to get in a home environment. Similarly, it's like you can make great pizza at home. And sure, these days you can get like a real hot pizza oven in the backyard. But if you go back, 50 years and you're in New York, there's the style of pizza that was made in pizzerias, which is sort of evolved from Neapolitan style, where you're baking it in a real hot oven. But then there was also like pan pizza, grandma style pizza, which is baked in home ovens in a pan, and they were just two different things, right? These days you can get grandma style pizzas in actual sort of regular New York pizzerias, but back then it was like, yeah, you had these two different products, and it's not that one was better or worse than the other. It's just two different products for two different contexts. So to ask, like, is there any food that can't be made better at home? Yeah, I'm not sure that's a question I could even answer because I don't think you're generally trying to replicate restaurant food at home for the most part. Like it's good to take sort of I think advice and techniques here and there from think about things from the perspective of a restaurant maybe, but not necessarily sort of like trying to emulate that food. All right, Colin Weeb, what is old school ziti? Old school ziti is Dorito 5K says old school ziti is baked ziti made by guys with nicknames like Vinny Chicken Cutlets. Yeah, Vinny Chicken Cutlets. Tommy Doublecut, and who else? Frank Milanese, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. What is old school ziti? It's like the kind of ziti that my mom would make out of traffic light meat in the 80s. That's what old school ziti is to me. All right, Curtis Long. What are some good recipes to make while traveling at an Airbnb and you don't have a lot of equipment, sharp knives, spices, etc.? Oh, well, the first thing is that if you're at an Airbnb and you don't have a sharp knife, the easiest way to sharpen a knife is you just find any sort of ceramic thing. So generally, like the bottom of a mug, the bare ceramic part that's unglazed, it'll work as as not as a steel, but as a stone. Like so, you can actually take material off your knife. So you can I would do like sort of 8 strokes on it that way, 8 strokes on it on the other side, and then what I do is I kind of go down 4 and 4. 2, 2, and essentially, you end up with 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. And if your knife is very dull, it will very effectively sharpen it. In fact, so at an Airbnb, if you don't have a sharp knife, use the bottom of a ceramic thing, and then you will have a sharp knife. As far as recipes to cook, I tend to gravitate towards sort of one pot things, so soups and stews. And also, my generally, I guess most of my Airbnb experience, and I guess this depends on the season, but most of my Airbnb experience is traveling to sort of winter destinations. So I often find just kind of, like stews and soups and things like pasta. Just anything you can make in one pot is generally, I think, a safe bet. Because the more different types of equipment you introduce and the more pieces of equipment you need, the more sort of stress you're going to be putting on an unknown kitchen. Whereas, you can sort of, if you have a recipe that all it takes is a knife and one single pot and a spoon, like you can pretty much guarantee that any place you're going to go will have you covered as far as that goes. Baked recipes, I think, are also really good to do in that regard. All right. All right, where are we going? If this ziti, where are we? If the ziti has ginger, can you explain why a peeler isn't the best tool for peeling? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, a peeler, the ziti. If the ziti had ginger, yeah. Well, ginger. I don't even always peel ginger in the first place anyway. But yeah, I mean, people will tell you that you can use a peeler. That works okay. Peel. That works fine actually. People tell you use a spoon. That actually works really well. Just kind of scrape it like that, and the skin will come right off. The other thing though is that very often you don't actually have to peel ginger. If it's like this is pretty, just feel the skin. Like if it feels kind of, or even eat a little bit. If it feels like, hey, that's not like really getting stuck in my teeth. Like honestly, like most of the time, I just leave the skin on the ginger. So what I do is when I cut ginger, I cut off like a little coin like this. If I want to mince it, I'll cut off kind of a little coin like that, with the skin and all. And then you put it down on the edge of your cutting board. You get a really sharp knife like this. You want to put it down close enough to the edge of the cutting board that you can whack it without whacking your hand on the cutting board. It'll work with any kind of knife, but I think a cleaver is the best. But you want to really sort of smack it hard. And essentially, like well, if you see it, that's all I did. I just whacked it twice. Now let me. I don't know if you can. I'll come up and show you what happens. Right. Can you all see that? You see? So it kind of chops itself when you do that, right? You just have to believe in yourself. That's the key. You can't give it a half-hearted whack or the ginger senses it. I think it's like some kind of like ginger juice is like a non-Newtonian fluid that gets harder if you don't whack it hard enough or something. Or it's like ginger's kind of into BDSM, and you kind of give it a hard whack for it to comply. Anyhow, that's how I get my ginger chopped. This is not going into anything right now. I'll put it into the what do I do? I'll put it into a cup, and Alicia will have some ginger tea later. All right, let's move on. That's still hot. In your opinion, I know each pasta has its own purpose, but what is your favorite pasta shape, Kenji? My favorite pasta shape, Kenji, is I don't know. I mean, I do like I like a small tubular pasta, and I especially like a sort of half-size small tubular pasta. So like a mezze rigatoni, like something like that. I really enjoy. But I love a good gnocchi. I don't know. It's like asking you to pick. It's like asking you to pick your favorite child, where it's like even if there's an obvious answer, you're never going to get the answer out of me. So that's it. Let's see. Kenji, you've been a huge inspiration for me. How long, by the way, how long has it been? Has it been half an hour? I'm not keeping track of this time at all. So if someone has been keeping track of time, let me let me know when it's done. What are some good recipes to make while traveling? No, we already did that. You've been a huge inspiration. Blah, blah, blah. All right. Okay. I now own my own food business. My question is, did you ever have fine dining slash Michelin star ambitions? Um, no, I worked in fine dining, and I staged in a bunch of Michelin star places. I never worked as a full-time employee in a Michelin star place. However, no, I never really had that ambition. My goal when I was still working as a cook was I wanted to sort of gather as much knowledge as possible about sort of the diverse range of cooking techniques from around the world. So, when I was considering new jobs, it was mainly like, what can I learn from this job? So is it like, am I going to learn how to make sashimi here? Am I going to learn how to make Spanish food here? Am I going to learn how to make pizza here? Am I going to learn how to make Mexican food? So stuff like that was what was most important to me, because I was just really curious about sort of the range of foods and techniques from around the world. In that process, I did obviously work at some sort of fine dining places, but it was never I never wanted to go become a fine dining chef. I think it's an ambition that some people have it. I think I don't think I would have been happy as a person if I had continued to go into that realm, into that world. Knowing myself, I would not have been happy. So no, the answer is no. Certainly not Michelin star ambitions. I have some problems with the Michelin stars that we'll leave for another time. All right, just wondering, what's your kitchen ventilation setup here? It doesn't look like there's a hood. There is no hood. So one of the issues on this houseboat, that's a good question. One of the issues on this houseboat is that let me move you over here and I'll show you. Hold on. Let me clean up a little bit just so you don't see the complete disaster up close, and then I'll pick you up and move you. Okay, ready? All right, so there is downdraft ventilation here. The pasta spilled over the edge of the pan. There's downdraft ventilation here, so this is actually ventilation, and it sucks in. It actually sucks in pretty effectively. The issue, however, is this is an electric coil. There's heating elements in here. Like, you turn it on and it turns red, and it gets really hot. So it's like an old school electric resistance coil style cooking setup. Obviously, I would prefer induction. We can't get gas on here, but I would prefer induction. However, nobody is currently making induction ranges that have downdraft ventilation. So The issue that I'm waiting on here is for that to come out. Gen Air, which makes this the range that I'm using right now, Gen Air does in fact. They're coming out with one this year, and so hopefully we'll be able to get that in place here at some point. All right, where are we at? All right, it's been about 15 minutes. All right, so we got another 15 minutes. Good. All right, let's see. Actually, let me do a quick peek at the. We'll do a quick midway peek. The other thing is I haven't used this oven too much, so I don't know like how evenly it bakes or anything like that. So I want to make sure that I don't need to rotate this. I suppose you want to see this too, right? Should we take a little look? All right. There it is. All right. There it is. All its glory. Whole armies could be fed with that thing, right? All right. It's got, yeah, I guess another 15 minutes to go. We're going to wait for some browning to take place. Is there anything else we're supposed to pop on there? Like, does she want us to give us, like, ooh, slivers of basil leaves? All right. Well, I got basil growing downstairs. I could run down and grab some. I'd have to leave you here. Anyhow, all right. Maybe I'll leave you like with something to think about before I come back while I go down and gather basil and come back. All right. What's my favorite vegan recipe? My favorite vegan recipe. Oh, this is a good one. This actually happens to coincide dovetail very nicely with recipes that I would suggest making at Airbnbs. This is a recipe I've made multiple times at Airbnbs. So in my cookbook and on Serious Eats, you'll find a recipe for this spinach and chickpea stew. In fact, this dovetails really nicely with everything we've been talking about today because in that stew, you also you cook tomatoes with ginger. And so there is a sauce made with tomatoes and ginger that you then cook spinach and olive oil. You cook it with spinach and olive oil and shallots, and then you mix it all together with some canned chickpeas. And I think it's extremely delicious and one of these things that like people love even if they're not vegan. Really easy to make with like canned ingredients, and the ingredients you can find at any supermarket anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country nearby. And a single pot. It's an ideal vegan recipe and ideal Airbnb recipes. So next time you go on that ski trip with like 20 people and like some of them are vegan or some of them like have weird allergies, make that one. It'll work. Panos asks, "Hi Kenji, I love the content. What's your relationship with Greek cuisine, and what's your favorite recipe food from Greece?" Ooh, my relationship with Greek cuisine mostly skews adult. It's I have a lot of friends from Greece actually. In fact, I have more friends from Cyprus, from the Greek side of Cyprus than from mainland Greece. But so I actually have quite a bit more experience with sort of Cypriot food than Greek food. This the last time I was in Cyprus for a week for my friend's wedding last summer, and we went to a factory where they made a factory, but like a place where they made feta, which is really nice, and they made it and then they made some cheeses out of this animal that is not quite a sheep and not quite a goat. I think it's called like a mufla or something like I can't remember what it's called. Some kind of animal on Cyprus that they make. It's like some imaginary creature that only exists in like Greek mythology, but somehow lives in Cyprus. Anyhow, we had some wonderful feta, and we ate it with this carob bean syrup and sesame, which I thought was delightful. We had amazing produce, like amazing tomatoes, tomatoes. And I felt this way when I was in Greece also, that like the tomatoes tasted almost better than any tomatoes I've had. Tomatoes and olive oil, and so I find like more than a specific dish, I just found like the simplicity of a lot of the food. So like just getting like really good quality ingredients, like a really good tomato and olive oil and like some really nice cheese, like that's like a great meal, and doesn't require like an elaborate recipe or anything. It just requires some good stuff. We also spent a day making like souvlaki with lamb, so that was pretty fun. We built a fire and had chopped up lamb on a spit, and you cook it like really really long. And to my mind, I'm like, oh my god, like we're overcooking this. It's going to get tough, and then it comes out super, falling off the bone, tender and crispy, and delicious. Anyhow, that's my relationship with Greek cuisine or Cypriot cuisine, I suppose. Josh Peter says, Kenji, I made your beef stew recipe last week and it was great, except that my potatoes refused to soften despite being cooked for longer than called for. Does acid from tomato paste cause this? That's a good question, and yeah, you answered it in the in your question there, it is the acid. So what can happen is that, so in the same way that calcium chloride will keep diced tomatoes from softening in the can as they're pasteurized in the can, they're cooked in the can, or as they cook in a stew afterwards, the acid in a sauce can prevent certain ingredients from softening. So yeah, well, pectin-containing ingredients, so most vegetables. So potatoes can get to the point where if your sauce is acidic enough, say the specific brand of tomato paste or canned tomatoes, or maybe the wine you're using is acidic enough, it can get to the point where your potatoes actually will not properly soften. And if that happens, I apologize. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's my bad. I should modify that recipe, or I should call up Daniel Gritzer and say, hey, Daniel, can you modify that old Serious Eats recipe and say, on the off chance that your tomato paste is more acidic than the average tomato paste, your potatoes might not soften. In those cases, I don't know if this has happened to you and it's burned you in the past and you want to make sure it's not going to happen again. You just cook your potatoes separately ahead of time and then add them towards the end. All right, let's see. Oh, thank you for the comments on the apron. The apron, I made this. There was a party, a fundraiser party at Canlis, a restaurant here in Seattle, a few weeks ago, and it was a Barbie themed party. So I spoke to my friends at Headley and Bennett, and I asked if they could make this apron for me, which says I am Ken Jeff. Anyhow, it felt good. All right, why does pasta with Parmesan and pecorino stirred in often glob up and stick to the spoon or bottom of the pan? Yeah, this happens to me sometimes regardless of whether I do it on or off the heat. That's another good question. And we sort of touched on this earlier sorry, I'm talking fast again. I sort of touched on this earlier when I was talking about why baked pastas can sometimes break. It all has to do with the emulsion and the way cheese proteins will essentially clump together as they get heated. So in a dish so the classic example would be a dish like cacio e pepe, right? Where all you have is pasta water, black pepper, and then pecorino romano. But essentially the sauce is just pasta water and cheese, right? And there's ways you can cheat. You can add like a bit of starch, you can add some butter. There's ways you can cheat around it to get the emulsion to form, but the classic dish is just pecorino romano and cheese. And so why does that cheese, when you add it to the pasta, not clump up and turn stringy? And if it does happen, why is it turning stringy, and what can you do to prevent that? The reason it doesn't turn stringy is because the pasta water itself has a lot of starch in it, and that starch will make the liquid element, the water in this case, more viscous, and so that makes it basically harder for cheese proteins to kind of bump up against each other and clump together. So it's like if you're playing like amoeba tag, that one where like kids, once you get tagged by the amoeba, you become part of it. If you're playing an amoeba tag in a gymnasium, that's sort of like what's going on with those cheese proteins. It's just like one cheese protein globs onto another, and then they start gobbling each other up until they're just one big amoeba, one big glob of cheese protein that, and they hold hands really tight. So as you pull those proteins, they'll stretch out and your cheese will become stretchy, and that's why mozzarella stretches. But they hold on really tight and they become stretchy, and that's essentially what's happening. However, if you were to then fill that gymnasium with like maple syrup, and so everyone's kind of like a little bit more sticky. It makes them harder for the taggers to grab the other people, and so you end up with a sort of an area where everything's stays a lot more dispersed. All the proteins stay a lot more dispersed. It becomes a lot more difficult for them to clump up together, and so that in that way your cheese sauce can stay sort of creamy and flowing. And so that's how adding starch to a liquid is going to help the Parmesan, or help the cheese from clumping. I don't even remember what the question was. I started talking. Why does pasta with Parmesan and pecorino glob up? Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's why. The ways you can prevent this, well, sure, doing it off heat is going to help. Making sure you have enough pasta water in there so that your ratio of liquid to fat and to cheese proteins is high enough. So reserve that pasta water, add it in there. Also, cooking your pasta in a smaller volume of water. So instead of doing the recommended gallon for 100 grams of pasta water, whatever it is that they recommend, instead of using a massive amount of water, use a smaller volume of water. I cook, when I do long pasta or any pasta, I want just enough water to cover it. It doesn't affect the way the pasta is going to cook. It'll cook just fine, despite what people tell you. It cooks just fine. And what you end up with is water that's more concentrated in starch, so that it'll help your sauces stay emulsified better. If you don't do that, the other thing you can do is just get a little bit of cornstarch and water, and just make like a little bit of a starchy slurry, or semolina flour and water. Make a little bit of a starchy slurry in a cup, and use that to thicken up your sauce, or add it to the pasta before you add your cheeses. And that will sort of thicken up the sauce and help everything emulsify. That pasta looks like it's almost done. I think I'll probably give it like a couple more minutes. Let's see. Hey Kenji, my partner and I, what time are we at right now? Anyhow, Kenji, my partner and I from the UK are big fans, thinking of getting a big wooden chopping board like yours, but worried about cleaning it if it's too big to put in the sink. Oh, good question. Okay, so big wooden chopping board. Yeah, people ask this question all the time, how I clean it. So essentially, on this big wooden chopping board, I don't put any, like raw meat. I essentially use this for vegetables, things like cheese. And so basically, I would consider this cutting board to be like sort of safe to eat off of at most times. And then I never take it to the sink. I scrub it down in place, and so I'll spray it. I'll spray it down with disinfectant spray. I'll scrub that down. First of all, what I'll do is I'll take my bench scraper. I scrape the whole thing at the end of each night or at the end of each cooking session. So just get a like, sort of the surface layer of all the stuff off using a bench scraper. I will then get a disinfectant spray, spray it down like a mild disinfectant or a very sort of diluted bleach. You can do that. Wipe it down, and a little soapy water and a sponge, and then I just let it, rinse it off and let it rinse it off with a clean sponge and let it air dry. And that's it. Every once in a while I will re-oil it, so I'll sort of saturate it in oil to make sure that it's not absorbing foods and liquids and stuff as I use it. And then even more every once in a while. Re-oiling is maybe once every 6 months to a year. And then even more rarely, I will resurface it, which means I will take either a sander and sand this entire surface. And in some cases, in fact, what I've also done is I've taken used my a saw, a circular saw to shave off some of these edges also to sort of give it a brand new edge and basically expose new wood all around and then refinish it all. I do that basically because over time, as you chop things, it's going to get dents and nicks. It's going to sort of get imperfections, and you can get rid of all those and just get a fresh new wood surface. There we go. All right, I think I got maybe time for, geez, lots of questions. A couple more. And if this is going well, and I got the time, I'll stick around to answer a couple more after the pasta's done. All right. I watch your videos for a while, but I'm intimidated to get into cooking. Any thoughts on this? Did you feel intimidated by dishes or cooking at any point? Sure, I felt intimidated, especially when I went into sort of restaurants and I had zero experience working in restaurants and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was kind of just like, faking it. Fake it till you make it, bake it till you make it, like the ziti. I was faking it. Yeah, I felt real nervous. What I didn't know back then was that, I'm sure I knew it, but what I wasn't thinking about back then is that everybody is born knowing nothing. Like everybody's a beginner at something at some point in their life, right? Everybody's really good at something. At some point, sucked at it. Whatever stage you are at right now, if you've cooked like twice in your life, you are better than the best cook in the world was the first time they cooked, or before they had any cooking experience. And so, yeah, so I think you just got to like kind of learn to be easy on yourself and like realize cooking is a skill like anything else. And while a recipe and a well tested recipe can help make sure that even if like something goes wrong, the end results are going to be edible. And still taste good, and you're not likely to make a lot of stumbles. Like a well-written recipe to me, I think is sort of like it's being given with a map with a lot of directions saying, hey, like this is the route you can try. By the way, like if you look that way, you might see this, but don't be tempted to go over there. Go over here instead. If you accidentally find yourself here, here's how to get back on the road. That's to me what a good recipe is. It's not just go here, go here, go here, go here. You're done. So a well-written recipe, I think, can help you learn how to cook in that sense, but and help you get to your end results with a bit of hand-holding. But cooking's a skill, and any skill is something you're going to have to practice. And during that phase of practicing, which ideally lasts forever, right? Ideally, if you're really into it and passionate about it, you're never at the point where you think, oh, I'm done learning. You're always learning, and so you constantly have to remind yourself, hey, I'm learning. I'm just learning here, and it's okay if I make mistakes. And that's at all stages of your life, whether you're a complete beginner or you're an expert. Like you should just be learning. And so I think just remembering that is what helps me. All right. Let's see. Let's do one last one. Alex Gallegos. Curious about the cast iron pan. I was always told cooking tomatoes and acidic ingredients in cast iron was a bad idea. Was I lied to? Also, I recommend the Riven 2024 remake. Okay, I will do. Oh, Riven 2024. Riven was it the sequel to Mist? Anyhow, yeah, cooking tomatoes in cast iron. People will tell you not to cook acidic ingredients in cast iron because it can strip the seasoning. This is true. It can strip sort of the surface layer of seasoning. If you don't have a very good surface layer of seasoning, it will also sort of strip the layer of black oxide, sort of the black layer inside that forms when you heat up cast iron or carbon steel, even without any oil in it. It can strip that layer of black oxide off. If that happens, first of all, it's not the biggest deal in the world. But the other thing is that if your pan is well seasoned enough, it won't strip the seasoning. The seasoning is a good seasoning is a polymer. It's like a plastic-like material that is going to be firmly embedded into your pan or firmly sort of caked onto the surface of your pan. And there's not much that's going to take it off other than sort of a real caustic, like alkaline, like an oven cleaner style thing, or some sort of real heavy sort of scraping. So you might lose some of your seasoning. You might also find out your seasoning was not as good as you expected it to be, thought it was going to be. But honestly, if the seasoning comes off when it starts to come off when you're cooking an acidic sauce in it, I think it's not that big a deal because that means your seasoning probably wasn't that great to begin with anyway. All right, let's get this pasta out of here, huh? I'm sure we are past time now. Ooh. All right, I'm gonna pull this out. What I'm gonna do is I'll move you so you're looking at it for a second while I go down and get some basil. All right. Can you? Oh, that's bad. That's not right. How do I flip the camera back around? Oh, back around. There we are. All right, everyone, sit tight for a second. I will be right back with some basil in hand. I'll have to remember I'm on a hot mic also, right? Hot mic. That's also the hot mic is the name of one of the dudes who makes old school baked ziti. Oh, I am one. All right. Grab some basil. I think Deb called it slivered basil leaves. I don't know that I've ever described basil leaves as any shape of basil leaves as slivers, but I think I know what she means, and I'll follow the language in the same spirit that it was intended, instead of picking on her for it. Yeah, by the way, for folks, if you weren't here at the beginning, what I'm working on today is I'm baking through my friend Deb Perlman's recipe for classic baked ziti. This is a recipe from SmittenKitchen.com. You can find the recipe in the link below. The reason I'm cooking this is because it's one of the recipes we're going to be discussing tomorrow when we record an episode for season 2 of our podcast, the recipe with Deb and Kenji, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. Other than YouTube, for some reason, it doesn't show up on YouTube. I don't know why. I think we're working on that though. But if you get your podcast anywhere other than YouTube, you will find our podcast. The first season of it has been out for a while, and the second season is coming up. All right, so what do we finish? We're going to finish with some. What is the dollops of your favorite ricotta and slivers of basil leaves if required. Okay, before serving. So I'm going to add some slivers of basil leaves. Let's just say that these are slivers. Sometimes what I like to do, if I have kind of, I just ran these under the sink and I didn't salad spin them or anything. So what I do is I take them like that, and what I'll do is I throw them like aggressively down, and that kind of whacks the water off them, and so they end up kind of nice and fluffier, so you can sprinkle them on more easily that way. That's like a little restaurant trick, I think. You store your herbs in water on the line, and then you whack them onto your cutting board just before you put them on there. It also, kind of opens up their flavor a little bit, or at least that's what like a bartender who's trying to earn your tip at a fancy cocktail bar will tell you. Although I was chatting with my friend Allison today, Allison Robicelli. You probably know her. She's a wonderful food writer. And she and I have been talking about also starting a podcast together. A podcast about, specifically about being middle-aged and sober. However, we were talking today about how she was saying how one of the things she can't stand is making cocktails. Even dry cocktails, non-alcoholic cocktails, that she just does not have the patience for. the fussiness of a cocktail now that she's sort of middle-aged, and I'm kind of with her on that. But then, as a joke, when Alice and I today were sort of brainstorming ideas for our podcast, we're like, we should ask Chat GPT for what it thinks a good segments for a podcast hosted by two middle-aged sober people would be. And one of the things it suggested was like, I'm too old for this shit, and I'm sorry, I'm too old for this stuff. And one of the specific examples was, well, it was talking about like things that now that you're middle aged, you no longer have the patience for, such as craft cocktails. So anyhow, I don't know if it was listening or if it's just a thing, but anyway, how do we get on that conversation? So the other thing I'm not following, Deb says to use dollops of your favorite ricotta, and I am using, I suppose, dollops of my. I wouldn't call this my favorite ricotta, but Deb does make the point that she vastly prefers adding dollops of ricotta after it comes out of the oven, as opposed to prior to baking. I think I'm with her on that, because especially if you're going to be using a ricotta like this, that isn't the best ricotta. And if you're going to be using a lot of ricotta, then I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be putting this Parmesan on right now. I'm sure someone will yell at me if I'm not, but I'm doing it anyway. All right, so feel free to yell away. I'm not going to listen to your cries will fall on deaf ears. If you're going to use a lot of ricotta, you want to make sure your ricotta is the ricotta you got is does not have a lot of stabilizers, right? I think that's right. Anyhow, all right. Let's do that. Let's take a quick picture. Let's take a quick picture for posterity here. Yeah, Hakuna ricotta. Yes, Hakuna ricotta is what I would. All right. And how long have I been? Yeah, I've been live streaming for an hour. I should probably cut this short soon, huh? All right. Here we go. Oh, by the way, that podcast that Alice and I were discussing, you will hear about it. It's called Dry Toast, which I think was a fun name. Which I think is a fun name for a sober podcast. It's called Dry Toast. It'll be coming out sometime. It's a pretty lo-fi endeavor. It's really, she and I are friends that go way back, and we said, hey, let's just do this thing together. So it is one of those. It's going to be one of those. Hey, two friends who have a fun time together, talking about a subject that they know about. That style of podcast. So if you like listening on fun conversations, that's it. If you want anything serious, then go elsewhere. All right, Deb, we're gonna dig into your lasagna. And if it's not good, then it's on you. That looks pretty good, right? Wait a minute. Right? Do I have to do one of these? Like, look at that, right? It does the cheesy thing. Oh. It does that cheesy thing. And look, we get do we get crispy cheesy bits from around the edges? We do. Look at that. It's almost like almost like the edge of a Detroit pizza here, Look at that little brown cheese bit. All right, let's eat it. This is like always the most awkward part of these videos for me, is that normally when I eat things, I just kind of eat them and I think to myself how they taste. And on camera, I don't know if you know this, but my thoughts don't register to the camera unless you're like a whatever it is, whatever I'm telling you right now. Unless you're that. And it doesn't come natural. It doesn't come naturally to me to fake pleasure, or to sort of aggressively fake pleasure, I guess. And so I can tell you that this is delicious. I think, given the amount of work that this took and the number of ingredients that are in here, the flavor comes out really nicely. I think there's a good balance of things going on in here. Um, I'm not sure that the spinach has as much other than a spinachiness. Um, no, actually, no, I like it in there. I would prefer more adult spinach. To it does have that kind of someone left the paper towels in the sink quality to it. All right, let me try some of the actual ricotta bit and see if my old impressions of this style of stabilized ricotta have changed over the years. Nope. It still tastes kind of like, it ends up tasting kind of like slightly grainy, salty water. That's what this kind of ricotta tastes like to me. Anyhow, even despite the ricotta, it's delicious. And now I got an issue because I have nobody coming over for dinner. Or nobody to give this to. I suppose I will. Yeah, my kids will eat some of it, but this is a lot. I think I'm gonna have to try and find some friends to invite over tonight. All right. Um, I don't think there are any last comments or anything. I mean, yeah, I'll get to some questions, but I mean, there are questions I didn't get to. Excuse me. Sorry, some questions I didn't get to. Maybe I'll answer one more, but then I gotta get running because this has been a kind of new one. All right, kind of long one. All right, let's see. What's a good last question to ask? Um, what is one of your favorite childhood dishes? All right, sure. What's one of my favorite childhood dishes? Um, well, a few of them. My mom cooked dinner for us every night, so we had dinner every night as a family. However, my mom did not really enjoy cooking, and I wouldn't say she was a particularly good she was not a passionate cook, let's say. And so she cooked because out of necessity and because she wanted to have family dinner every night, but she wasn't super into it. However, the things that she was really good at and sort of more into were Japanese foods and sort of those types of staples. So for me, my favorite dish growing up, and still one of my favorite dishes to today, is well, there's two. There's my mom's gyoza, so Japanese style dumplings. She would make them with ground beef. I make them sometimes with ground beef, sometimes ground pork. But yeah, she would usually make them with ground beef and then adult spinach or cabbage. Yeah, I love my mom's dumplings. And then out of the leftover dumpling filling, she would use that as the base for a Japanese style mapo tofu. So tofu, beef, and then a sauce made with sake, mirin, soy sauce, a little miso, a little bit, sometimes like a little chili, like a chili paste, something like that. But anyhow, those are my favorite childhood dishes, and still my favorite dishes now, and still my kids' favorite dishes as well. Like those are two things that if I make them, my kids will 100% eat them. All right. So this has been Deb Perlman's Smitten Kitchen's old school baked ziti. Real simple recipe. I did it in the time that this live stream took, and I spent a lot of time kind of futzing around in the process. So I think if I can do it, you can probably do it in the same amount of time. And then yeah, it's delicious. It's delicious and easy, and it's very different from my recipe, which is has no meat, has no ricotta, and has no boiling. In fact, my recipe you soak the noodles. You soak the nudes and you pack them in. And anyhow, Deb and I are going to be discussing this on episode 3 of season 2 of our podcast, the recipe with Deb and Kenji. The recipe with Kenji and Deb. And if you want to follow us, you want to get sort of news on when that podcast is going to be coming out. Over on Instagram, we are at Kenji and Deb, and you can follow us there. And yeah, otherwise, just follow me on my normal things. Happy whatever day of the week is today. What day is it? Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, everybody. And I'll see you next time, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Bye bye.